Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Edge and Flow podcast. It's me, TJ Schwartz. I'm here with Lucas Burnley, my co host. I want to kind of interrogate you today. I want to talk about brand building. I want to interview you. I really kind of want to learn where your head's at in that regard. But I guess maybe first, let's just touch base real quick on what we've been up to this week. A little
Oh, that
recap.
sounds good. Yeah, we haven't talked since last week, pretty much.
hmm
A couple things. I decided I really needed a break from businessy business stuff, and
hmm
decided to make like a big old honking 8-inch fixed blade. And I've been thoroughly enjoying that.
The one with the big fuller.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I have three blanks that I cut out a long time ago, and I think the project around them is going to be I'm going to do three different types of fullers. Kind of try to come up with a few different like aesthetics. Just having fun.
Yeah.
I love making big knives,
Looks like fun.
dude. I will be sending in my design shortly to
Yeah.
Schwartz Knives.
There you go.
And then the other thing, I guess, that's taken up a lot of time is Burnley Brand is doing a collaboration with Good Art Hollywood, who is a very rad. I like almost hesitate to call them like a jewelry company just because the like how broad the like the design level they do is and like the products. So they use this term like luxury EDC,
Mhm.
and that is like very much on brand. So we dropped a little teaser 25 piece sprint run of a new ring that we're working on.
Oh, yeah. I did
So
not see that, so I'll have to
yeah,
look at
dude,
it.
I'm
It's
psyched.
like on Good Art's Instagram and stuff.
It's not we basically did it inside of the Burnley like collectors club, the brawler club,
Oh, I
and we
see.
just released 25 pieces, sold basically like in a few sizes.
Mhm.
Rings are really hard because it's such like a preferential size thing. So basically let everyone get a chance in there, and then I threw the link in my main Facebook group and gave
Mhm.
those guys a shot. But we wanted to just like dial in production and do these have like a little bit of a different like maker's mark on the inside.
Mhm.
They're marked with AR, so it's like advanced release. So
Mm.
kind of fun if
Mhm.
you're of the collector mindset.
Mhm.
And then, but we're getting ready to launch like a real pre-order with real sizes.
Well, you're all over the types of things that I wanna ask you about later in this episode. I was
All right,
I put, like, 3
fun.
bookmarks in my brain on what you were just saying, so
All
we'll
right.
dig into that.
What about you?
Yeah, it was a weird week kinda spinning around, it was my son's first birthday, and
Oh
so that was
man,
good
I saw that.
earlier in the week, so happy about that. And, towards the end of the week, Zach Whitmore, who you may know from previous Blade HQ days on
I
YouTube,
love
but he
Zach.
now
I like both
now
those guys, Zach and
yeah,
Jamie.
and Jamie Greger,
Dude,
who's
so
who's
good.
the editor and filming guy. They've got their sweet YouTube channel, Zach in the Wild, and yeah, he was doing some big loop filming with, I don't even know all the people he's visiting, but it sounded like a big, like maybe even more than a week big trip.
Oh wow,
So he came, yeah, just coincidentally, he realized he was coming by the shop near me, so he stopped in. We did a little filming and stuff. Got to catch up with them, so that was
nice.
awesome. And then did stone some blades today. So today was the actual day in the shop day. Uh, got a design finished and submitted this week,
Ooh,
but I was at the tail end, so pretty much just kind of finalizing it and submitting it this week. And then just tax stuff. It's that time of year. I
dude,
kind
we're
of had to
getting
dig
ready
into
to do
that.
it.
Yeah,
I'm not looking forward.
yeah. I sat down with my CPA and talking about converting to the S corp, like I mentioned, and so trying to get this year's taxes all set up while it's still
Yep,
early in the year.
S
But
corp's going to be a game changer.
yeah, it seems like it. Definitely seems
Nice.
like it.
Yeah, little mix, little mix. I
Yeah.
don't know why, man. Yeah, it feels this week has felt like started out pretty good. I like when we jumped on, like I went out to the shop this morning. I was like, I'm gonna finish this handle, and it's like all hand shaped everything. And like within 10 minutes, I got my first phone call,
Yeah.
and my day basically just like spiraled into
Oh, it happens
management
so
mode.
fast.
I know,
Yeah.
I know. I'm getting better
Yeah.
about protecting my time,
hmm
but like this week, there was a bunch of days where I didn't answer the phone or like schedule anything before 1 or
Yeah.
2 p.m.
Yeah.
So,
It makes sense. Like I was calling to talk to a machine shop, helping another guy out, and the owner of the company who still runs the machines, I know him pretty well, and the gal at the front desk who answered the phone, I could tell like how well she was
mhm.
trained to be like, get all the info before she even considers bringing it up
Mm-hmm.
to the owner. And I'm like, that would be nice to
Dude.
have
Well,
someone.
that's the thing. Like at our scale, we need to be our own gatekeepers.
Mm-hmm.
Once you scale past that, it's like easier
Yeah.
to start to create a little separation. You need
Yeah.
a password.
Yeah. Right.
Like,
Yeah. It's a secret handshake before they
yeah,
can
secret
talk
handshake.
to me. Yeah. That's funny.
Cool.
But yeah, man. So I am excited about this episode. It kind of occurred to me because we've been in such a conversational mindset all the
Mm-hmm.
time with this, and just kind of back and forth. But that there's some topics that I strictly just want to learn from you about, and I think kind of defining this as like me interviewing you in a way, kind
That's
of
fun.
tease it up. So
Well, thanks for having me on your podcast.
oh yeah,
Long time
well,
listener, first time interviewee.
took me a lot of emails to get a hold of you, and then finally glad to have you here.
Yeah, the gatekeepers and
Yeah,
all.
right.
Yeah, I'm psyched. Since you had like brought this up last week, I was thinking about it. I was like, man, maybe I should like write down like some of my like thoughts around like branding and brand building and like all this. And I was like, no, so much of it has been organic and like intuition based that I actually felt that having to like answer some questions and stuff on the fly would be beneficial for me because I don't know that I have answers
Mhm.
for a lot of things.
Right.
And then also maybe more interesting. So that's my plan.
Yeah.
I know nothing.
Yeah. Well, let's get to it.
Let's do
I
it.
I wanted to do a quick intro on what I view your skills to be, just to set the platform. So like
Oh, okay.
I I think most people would agree, or a lot of people in the industry would agree, that you possibly are like one of the best brand building, brand managing individuals in the entire industry. I
Hmm.
believe that, and I think I am not alone in thinking that. And that's why I'm excited for this conversation. You've got multiple brands you're doing. You're always helping brands that you're working with. You design for companies. You're always giving a lot of designers. They're just giving design input, but I know with your inner workings with a lot of these companies, like you're helping on the branding side too,
Hmm.
and it's just a big part of what you do. And so anybody listening to this, there's a good chance they already know that, but if you didn't, that's why I'm asking you these questions.
Fun.
But first things first, I guess. Tell me about would you say that like the way that you managed your brand it seems like a piece of like if there's a pie chart of all the things you focus on, like brand management is a bigger piece of the pie than what most makers would have for you. Has it
Yeah,
always been that way?
I would agree with that. And this would have to go back before I had the concept of brand
Mm-hmm.
because there was a lot of years of knife making where that hadn't come in yet. Like you think of reputation, you think of your name, you think of your company, but those things do not necessarily equal being a brand,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, I think it's like pretty holistic. Even just that little like segue got me like off. What was like the root of the question?
Well, it just seems like if you were to
Oh, the
look at
focus,
your
right?
time as a pie chart, it's such a big part maybe of what you're doing.
Yeah. So ooh, yeah, even early on, I mean, you have to think like I came into the industry when forums were just absolutely popping,
Mm-hmm.
right? So this is like not pre Facebook, but pre Facebook for like small group collectors and like every, user group is in Facebook. Um, and so, yeah, I think that from that point, like from there, it's like just like thinking about like, hey, I want to do t-shirts. Like, why do you want to do a t-shirt? You're a knife maker. Well, t-shirts are cool. It's advertising, but it's like, it's just a different level of connection point for a customer.
Mm-hmm.
So I think those moments were where like the concept of brand for me really started to form. Like I can create past like the like I'm searching for the word, but like the primary or like iconic
Yeah.
products I'm
Yeah.
making.
Like the physical part of it.
Like the physical part, there's something past that
Yeah.
that creates value for both you and your customer that can scale past like what you're
Yeah.
doing, what that like core product.
Well, from the outside looking in, it's like when you design something or you're doing a project, there's like the physical form of that thing, but
Right.
it looks like that's just a piece of it.
Yes.
And it seems more clear when you do that than it seems when some, like when I do that or when lots of people do that. Like it seems like that people like me are very, very product focused.
Hmm.
And that's something why I want to learn from you is like there's all these other layers that it seems like you're thinking about from the very beginning. Would you
Hmm.
would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. And I think this is this is kind of a scale, right? So you have on one hand, you have someone who is completely product focused. They don't care about building a brand. They don't care about visibility necessarily. Like they want to build the product. Okay.
Mhm.
And there's different levels inside of that as far as like where the attachment point is. Like for some people, it's the finished product. For some people, it's the process.
Mhm.
Right. Some of the absolutely most talented, like gifted makers, builders, etc., are some of the ones who focus on branding the least.
Mhm.
I hesitate to say like the worst at
Yeah.
branding
Just
because I
least
don't even think it's
concerned.
they're the least concerned with it.
Yeah.
From a purely business standpoint, like I always think like, man, I would love to see this person be able to like hype themselves a little bit
Mhm.
more because
Mhm.
I think it brings value to them,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
Um, and then on the other side, you have brands that are all brand. Okay. That is where they focus heavily on story. So the story can create a lot of interest around a product. I like to think that I like reside somewhere in the middle,
Mhm.
right? Because my product, the way that I work and what I build is super, super important to me. But I also feel that telling the story and letting people like inside
Mhm.
is equally important from from the standpoint of like it's really hard because
It's not like a hollow shell of marketing.
no, yeah,
Yeah.
it's not a
No, I
hollow shit.
agree.
It's not marketing. And that's the thing.
Yeah.
Like people be like, oh, you're like good at marketing. I'm like, I actually don't think I'm good at marketing. Like, there's a lot of areas where I think the organic kind of nature of it has almost presented something different than the way I've done it, which is really strange.
Mhm. Mhm.
Right.
Well,
So
you
yeah.
you talked about you mentioned the word or the words attachment point. Can
Yeah.
you like elaborate or define that?
Yeah, absolutely. Different ways on looking at this, but like, okay, if you look at a custom knife, my goal when I would do shows is to like I think this concept starts to like separate from like the pure tool based or like function based concept, right? So you pick up a pocket knife. Like my goal at a show, if someone picks up a pocket knife on my table, is like they look at it from one angle and then they start to like rotate it and they're like, oh, that's cool. And what is that? And then they like rotate a little more and they're like, oh man, like check that thing out.
Mhm.
And by the time they're done, they've actually been looking at it for like 3 minutes. Those are attachment points.
Mhm.
So that works on a physical product and it works on a brand, right? So the other way that I look at attachment points is you have to be able to let people attach to your brand. If you make a very exclusive product, either through pricing or availability or any other metric, you reduce the amount of people that can actually connect with your brand.
Mhm.
They just don't have they don't have an entry point.
Yeah.
By allowing the brand concept to reach past that core product line, you're allowing people to engage like at their own level.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
hey, I don't have $2,000 to buy this custom,
Yeah.
but like, they are doing like such nice work. I'm definitely buying a baseball cap.
Yeah.
And like
Mhm.
when you look, I mean, how many people you think have like, something from Harley Davidson or like Porsche or, Ferrari or whatever it is, or like a sports team, it's a connect. Those are attachment points,
Oh yeah.
right?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I like that. I like how it's like you're building a pyramid in a sense instead
Totally.
of just like something so aspirational but like behind closed doors that it's a turnoff for anybody who's not in the room.
Right.
so to speak. Yeah, that's very interesting.
We always use the term, like I say, uh, inclusive exclusivity.
Yeah, I like that.
Okay. And the reason is like, yeah, I want to be an exclusive product. I want to be like a premium kind of, um, I don't know. Maybe premium is not even the right word. Uh, it's not luxury either. There's a level there where it's like, I want to be in demand, but I don't want to be so exclusive that it's like limited to a few.
Yeah, yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Or like exclusive to the point of exclusion. And that is, there's all these word plays that, like, when you really kind of get into the root of what they mean, I think you have to be really careful of how you attach them to your brand,
Mm-hmm.
because I want an inclusive brand.
Yeah,
And when I say inclusive, I mean that like very broad spectrum,
yeah.
but it's easy to like dial it down into like, oh yeah, I want like people with different like financial capabilities to be able to like engage with the brand.
So would you
Right.
say that's an incentive for you to design for like these more mass market brands, like
Absolutely.
CRKTs of the world?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
interestingly enough, the the factory collaboration for the maker, when I started doing those, was probably like I had probably started to play with like the concept of Burnley brand, but I saw those projects as a way to build personal brand recognition. So at this point, kind of everybody, like, I think people have a much more open view of like you as a brand, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
you the maker, you the artist, you the creative
Mm-hmm.
as a brand, regardless of whether you are fitting in like a standard like concept of what a brand or what most people think of a brand is.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, so even to this point today, I look at factory collaboration as more of like individual branding and having less to do with like our brand.
Yeah. It's like you're the you're the face that is like sort of encapsulated in the Burnley brand,
Right.
and by having, products with CRKT and the exposure gained from that,
Right.
it's like it's not directly pointing towards Burnley brand, but it's pointing towards you, and you are
Right.
associated with Burnley brand in a
Right.
sense. Like you're
Yeah,
the
in a
glue
sense.
between them.
Yeah, and the
Yeah.
reality is I don't know if there's that much kind of differentiation.
Mhm.
And an ideal scenario is that all of that visibility is like circular.
Mhm.
So almost like the attachment theory, I want people that come into the brand from any given point to eventually rotate through the other kind of levels.
Mhm.
Ideal scenario for me is like someone buys a squid from CRKT for $20 or $30, and on Amazon or at, Sportsman's Warehouse or something, and sees the name and like tracks it down and like finds our Facebook group
Mhm.
and then ends up being interested in something.
Or at the very least associates that design in their head, and then they see you like on Instagram or something, and they're like, "Oh,
Totally.
I have that knife."
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cause we're in a really unique period of time, which is information is available,
Mhm.
you know? Even like early days, like forums, like you could find this stuff and like the big names were big names, but the accessibility was completely different. Like,
Mhm.
not to like fully date myself, I don't even see this as a negative. It's just like purely a situational thing. But like, I think there's a lot of makers that like don't actually understand what a boon like social media
Mhm.
truly is from an availability standpoint. Like, because I look at it, like where I came in, we had computers and you could go in a chat room. Not too far before that, like you were sending letters for techniques and you were going to knife shows and looking at knife magazines to find makers,
Putting ads out and
putting
whatnot.
ads
Yeah.
out. You're not
Yeah.
dropping a photo from your pocket computer
Mhm.
onto the interwebs and having, 10,000 people see it.
Yeah.
It's
So
a
would you
different
would
game.
you say that transition has changed how you view your brand, or is the brand do you feel like the brand transcends that technology? Does that make sense?
No, it doesn't transcend it. I think it's partially a product of it,
Okay. Yeah.
um, as well as, I mean, not fueled completely by it, but to say like I would have the same brand without social media is like absolute trash. It wouldn't be possible.
Right. Be a different
Um,
different
yeah,
game
some of
plan.
this stuff, like from a standpoint, because I realize we're going to get like probably pretty far into the weeds with this. If anyone is really curious about something you can read on brand building that like almost identically parallels my philosophy, there is a book by Bobby Kim, who has a brand called The Hundreds, which is a streetwear company, and it's called "This Is Not a T-Shirt."
Mm,
Um, and I read it and I like, man, and like not to sound corny, but I had like goosebumps at like certain points because he started his business the same year I started mine.
mm,
And reading it was like reading a journal from like myself in a parallel universe, a
that's
universe where
crazy.
like I started doing clothing instead of making knives.
Yeah.
Super good.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned that because when I think of your brand building, that is what I immediately think of is like the streetwear
Yep.
scene. That I subconsciously connected those just
Yep.
based on like the feel.
Yep.
And
That's accurate.
one thing that I've thought of is with your brand is like there's a lot of different ways to do a brand, obviously, but it seems like the way you've done it, it's like you've sewn a cool factor into it because there's some brands that they don't really have the cool factor, but they're seen as like functional or they're seen as
Right.
like useful or inexpensive or whatever. But it's like there's like a swagger cool factor
Right.
that you've sewn into it that really reminds me of like the streetwear thing.
Right. Well, and
Was that
that come
intentional?
yeah, in it's hard to say intentional because it's not like intentional, not from like a strategic
Yeah.
standpoint. Did I look and say, "Hey, I need this cool factor"? So I think there's like a couple concepts around branding that are really important to keep in focus, which is like one is just authenticity. Like people know, I think a lot of times if you're faking it.
Mm,
And
yeah.
so chasing fads or chasing trends because you see something is like a really good way just to like fail.
Yeah.
So the other component of that is that I feel the best brands are the brands that like you belong to or are part of. So like my brand in a way is like an amalgamation of all of my interests. And since my interests are broad, the scope of what I think of as brands is broad.
Mm,
And I feel like a lot of people, like when you're talking about, like, say, in the knife industry, I think that brands are being built inside of a culture where they, it's like a more functional, I'm trying to think of like how to put this together. You know, like it's almost like tool brands or like a hunting company or something. And this stuff is starting to change now too, right? Because
mhm,
you're having like younger company owners that are interested in like have broad spectrum interests.
mhm.
But for a while it was like, yeah, it's like, okay, this is like we make hunting knives and like this is our hunting knife
Yeah.
aesthetic. And like they're not
Yeah.
worried about seeming cool,
Mhm.
nor should they be.
Right.
But I think for people coming into the industry to try and follow in those footsteps because you think that that's like how knife brands or like EDC brands are run. I think that's a huge trap. Like we always used to joke about SHOT Show. It's like you have two aesthetics. Okay.
Mhm.
You have like uh distressed dystopian and you have like wood.
Yeah.
Those are like the two things.
Mhm. Yeah.
Right. So I think that trying to like, do you have a vintage American flag or do you have like a war torn, tattered radical flag?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like,
When you've got, like, the Remington double barrel that's engraved with a
yeah,
pheasant in gold inlaid on it, and then you've
yeah,
got the M4 carbine fully
yeah,
decked out, the
yeah,
suppressor. Yeah.
yeah. That's like, it's just, is there room, like you look at the firearms industry, is there room for that to change? Like it is changing now, but it's because you've got like these super talented gunsmiths and stuff that are like, yeah, actually, like I'm also a skateboarder, and like this
Mhm.
is the aesthetic that I like,
Mhm.
you know.
So,
So
let me ask you this, like, the way you set your brand up is very obviously, like, human focused, and what I
totally,
mean by that is, like, you do your family. It's like obviously a family business. If you
Yep.
follow any of your accounts, it's obviously you, like you're obviously a real person. This podcast is kind of an example of that.
Yep.
That's not the only way. There's brands that there is no person, if that
Right.
makes sense.
Yep.
When you set out, you made Burnley knives,
Yep.
Burnley brand.
Yep.
You could have done like, New Mexico Knife Works or
Totally.
whatever.
Yep.
Can you talk about that and how intentional or
Yeah, absolutely.
accidental that was?
Totally accidental on that standpoint. Like when I started making knives, for the most part, like you made knives under your name. There were people and brands who had a name
Hmm.
for their knives, you like Jeeps. Like oddly enough, at one point I thought like, it's like, oh, I'll call it Rubicon knives, like cross the Rubicon. It sounds rad. And I like, this is like before I had made a knife.
Hmm.
And I just ended with like, oh, it's my name. I'm going to
Hmm.
sign it's because you're at the point, especially like where you start making knives, you're signing something that you made. And that feels authentic.
Hmm.
I made this thing. I'm going to sign it.
Yeah, that
So
makes
as an
sense.
entry point, that kind of informed the business, right? Starts to move forward. And as far as like the access, starting out at that point, like you're interacting with people at shows, you're interacting with people online. And as my family grew and my business grew, there was never a point where I was like, oh, I'm going to separate my family from the business. And it was never an act of like, oh, I'm going to use my family as an asset to
Hmm.
like make my business look human.
Right, right. Yeah,
Right.
it's not artificial, which is kind of to your previous point. It's
Right.
it's like just authenticity that can be interpreted however
Yeah.
you people want. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, the access, I really think that that's what makes the knife industry in general pretty interesting is that we've talked about this before, like your level of access to whatever level of mover and shaker you want to find is pretty flexible.
Hmm.
Like you go to Blade Show, you can talk to almost anybody in the industry,
Hmm.
from whoever owns a company to your favorite maker to, people you don't know. I mean,
Yeah.
it's broad spectrum.
Yep. Yeah, for sure. So, would you say, because it seems to me like it's rare, like you see it pretty common in the knife industry that it's like a name, because I'm Schwartz
Right.
Knives, you're Burnley brand, Burnley
Right.
Knives. It seems like that's a rarer thing to see with a huge company. Like if you're targeting,
Totally.
multi-million international, like think of all your big brands. You got your like Leathermans and
Yep.
your Benchmades. It's like
Yep.
there's a name and a face that it
Yep.
could have been associated with that.
Yep.
Do you think that when you get to a size like that, there's a different approach?
Well, you
Or
got to
is
think though, like some of those brands didn't start out at that size. Like
yeah.
Benchmade started with Les Diasis, and
Mhm.
he could have made the decision to just have it under his name.
Mhm.
I actually suspect that a lot of times people who are starting businesses might have like a clear inclination of maybe where they want to take it.
Yeah.
And I think that folks that are more like corporate minded, that just might be how they set it up,
Yeah, it's almost
you
like a
know,
not in a not negative way. It's almost like a
100%
fake
not
it till you
negative.
make it.
Right.
It's like in the best way you can use that term, like fake it
Yeah.
till you make it. It's
Yep.
like I'm gonna kind of like project what I want this to be starting from the beginning, and I
Yeah.
want it to look like a corporation from the very beginning.
Yep.
Yeah, that's what I was curious about because your brand, you look at it and it doesn't seem corporate for
Right.
better or worse. Like
Right.
there's can you think of any cons to that?
Uh, I would say the only con that I feel sometimes is our visibility at this point is actually bigger than our brand. It's me and Maddie. Like it's me and my wife running this small brand. And sometimes people will interact with us and like you can tell that they just think we're like a mass production knife company or like, our shipping department should be like, Blade HQ or, I
Mhm.
mean like
Mhm.
top level. And we realize like, no, man, we just had a sick kid and like our mail day is a day late.
Yeah,
Like,
right.
so that like, and if you dig around, like if you go on our website, like we never try to look like a bigger brand that we are,
Hmm.
but like we've been really fortunate just to have a lot of visibility, I think, in our industry.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of a downside.
Would you say that it's like if you're overly polished, it can kind of dehumanize the brand, but if you're under polished and you're a corporation, it can be seen as like bush league, like you're not as
Man,
legit.
it's crazy because like a lot of times I feel like the bigger the brand, the worse the branding. Because I
Expand
think a
on
lot
that.
of people, they don't feel that it matters. And I think culturally, like what brand is means different things to different people. Um, and that's like, we can get into that a little bit too.
Hmm.
And also like reasons for branding, like just in general, like I will, when I look at what we've done, like I always say it like starts, it's community first. So like our community allows me to do what I want for a living.
Hmm.
So if I'm not like accountable to them on some level, like what am I doing?
Hmm.
Like they're giving me so much like freedom and like trust that I have to view things through the lens of like, all right, like community is actually the first pillar of branding for me. Build your
That's a
community.
good thought. So
Yeah.
one way I've heard that phrased is like you're better off having 1,000. You may have said it. You're better off having like 1,000 really good customers that you take care of them, they take care of you, than
Yeah.
you are having a million kind of passive
Yeah.
customers.
Yeah. I think that's like a pretty old concept. Like I'm
Yeah,
sure like Timothy Ferriss has talked about that. It's
yeah,
like basically the idea that at a point that you have 1,000, the different ways of looking at it, like I like true believers, right? Like at the point that you have 1,000 people who believe in your brand or your whatever you make and want to support you and like what you're doing, like that is actually like you have a business,
hmm,
right? Then it's scaling. And I think we've never advertised. We actually just did like our first little advertising push with Raven the pirate, um, who is like, again, like I pretty much only work with friends of mine,
hmm,
and so Sam's a friend.
hmm,
But when I look back, I'm like, I basically made it 20 years without ever paying for an ad.
hmm.
I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah, yeah, and that's you. What you have is word of mouth.
right?
That's I'm sure. Would you agree that that's like your main mode of advertising over 20 years?
Yeah,
Just
and I think it fits. Like I have always been reticent to scale. Like, is that the right word? Reticent? Yeah,
yeah,
feels right. Yeah,
I think
feels
so.
right. Right.
Yeah,
Okay. Uh,
close enough either way.
yeah, like the goal has always been to stay as small as possible, but as big as we need to be. Like
Hmm.
what that means changes over time, and it might be changing again for me, but ultimately, like growth has never been the goal.
Hmm.
Um, what was the original question you asked?
Uh, uh, honestly,
Is it
I
gone?
I was enjoying what you were saying, and
Yeah.
I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah, I think you answered it.
Okay.
No, uh, I also wanted to dig into so with your branding, like with the size you just touched
Yep.
on like the growth and the size, whether you're not targeting, like you said, a corporation of massive scale,
Yeah.
and it doesn't seem like you're making moves to attempt that or anything
Right.
like that. What's your reasoning? Like, give me your thoughts on what the value of your size, I guess, is.
I actually, right now, I don't know that there is much value in our current size because I truly feel we're kind of in a limbo. We will struggle with small brand problems and big brand problems.
Hmm.
At this point, like I look at it, I'm like, wow, we have way more demand than like the items I can produce. But our revenue and time is still probably lower than it would need to be if I wanted to start to scale. And so you're like, oh, you could take on an investor. Well, I don't want to take on an investor.
Hmm.
So it's like these,
Hmm.
it's like these mid-level problems where you just are kind of in like a little bit of a limbo,
Hmm.
right? Like yeah, if I could throw in another $500,000 and get certain types of projects rolling, it would probably change the brand moving forward.
Mhm.
But I have no desire to do that.
Yeah, it's like you hear about businesses that grow generally have like a couple of squeeze points,
Yep.
and it's like you hear them. Some books and articles go really into defining these squeeze
Yep.
points, and that's kind of it sounds like what you're talking about. Because I guess one of the squeeze points for you that is compounded with that is like you're on the verge of either having employees or not. You've
Yep.
had a couple, like
Yep.
that's a squeeze point of like
Yep.
getting past the first couple employees.
Yep. Yeah. So
Um,
that was the first real squeeze point that oh man, that was like a difficult squeeze point, because before it's like, oh, I need help. So you get an employee and then
mhm,
you get two. So we made it to Maddie, myself, and two full-time employees. And at that point, what happened was I became middle management, which in no way is where I am
right.
suited to be, but couldn't get past the point of figuring out how to hire
Yeah,
someone who could be middle
and
management.
that's the squeeze point right there. Yeah.
That's the squeeze point, because I needed a gatekeeper. All of a sudden, all of my time was now manager, not maker, not designer, not, uh, you know, like brand, like oversight or anything else,
Mhm. Mhm.
creative director or anything.
Mhm.
So yeah, squeeze points. Um, and then on the flip side of this, we're small enough that because of the scale of the business, we run into problems with that too. Where it's like I told you today, I'm like, my whole day got blown out with calls around things that relate to the brand.
Mhm.
When what I had intended to do was sit down and make a knife.
Yeah.
I don't have an on staff graphic designer who can have that conversation, or someone who is in, fulfillment, or someone who is in like ordering to like
Yeah.
handle this stuff. It's like, oh man, I need to do more SciPops. I have to order material. None of this stuff on its own is a problem. It's when everything scales to a certain point that you're like, yeah, you throw like one little stick in the spokes and you
Yeah.
eat it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, for sure. So it seems to me like the size of your brand, I mean, tell me if this rings true to you. It's like you see, I mean, Facebook comments are Facebook comments, but it's
Yeah.
one little gauge. It's like the way people interact and respond on social media to like a big corporation
Yep.
is like they have a sensation they're not talking to a human being.
Yep.
But it's like your brand is small enough that if you read your comments,
Yep.
it's like they're talking to you.
Yes.
Is that part something you wish to retain?
Um yeah, I mean, I guess in a way, the feeling like the company is accessible to people is important to me. What's really funny is like, so Maddie basically manages like the Burnley brand Instagram.
Mhm.
Some people know this, but like most people just still respond with like, "Hey, bro." Like
Mhm.
they just make the assumption that it's
Yeah.
me everywhere.
Mhm.
Um, so I think with scale, it's like you talking about the machine shop and the owner and like the secretary like blocking for him.
Mhm.
Like there's there's a point where not everybody needs access.
Yeah.
Uh,
I guess let me make sure I clear that up that I'm not
sure.
talking about like people all these people being able to access you.
No,
What I
no,
mean
but the
is like it
perception of it.
looks like you're a person
Right.
and you could get based on the style of your branding and the size of your
Yeah.
company to where they just by default assume they're not talking to you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think probably our goal would actually be to move towards that a little bit for Burnley brand.
Mhm.
And that's why like
Like
originally I would kind of do Burnley knives and Burnley brand stuff under my main feed. But what we realized was it didn't give no one else would be able to post under my feed because it's my voice. And
mhm.
so Burnley brand, like Instagram, is essentially Maddie's voice and my voice.
Mhm.
Either one of us can go in there and post. By extension, if we ever had someone who could help with social media, they would also be able to go in there and post. And so
Mhm.
I think that maybe ties into like kind of a tenet of branding, which is like at the point that you are building brand, I think it's worthwhile having an idea or like an oversight on scale,
Mhm.
because you can scale a bad system, but like scaling a bad system is not a way to like fix problems.
Right, right.
But if you can build in like resiliency, redundancy, and flexibility at the base level, that I think really carries through like as you start to grow as a brand,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, for sure. And it when I look at your brand and I see like I said, how you can easily anthropomorphize Burnley brand. It's like it's like a human being. It's like
Yeah.
a real thing. And I look at some of the most successful brands on the large world stage. You know, you look at like the Teslas, the Apples. You've got
Yes.
like the Steve Jobs types. You got the Elon Musk types. Like if there wasn't that human image when you look at a brand, maybe that would have been problematic in their growth.
Yeah.
So it seems like you're onto something there. Would
Yeah.
you say though that like I kind of already asked this question, but I
Yeah.
guess
Yeah.
would you say like is there a reason not to do that? You know what I mean? Like
I think this
or
comes
is there
back
a
to the
point where you should
authenticity.
like pull in?
I think it depends on you.
Yeah.
So, are you front of the house or back of the house?
Mhm.
Because there are a lot of people that don't want to be the front person, you know, of a brand.
Mhm.
Where I realized that if my brand were to scale and I had all the help I needed and all the infrastructure, I would essentially want to move into the position of creative director and still be the front man.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah.
Because that's like that to me is like the kind of the fun part of it. And it's where I feel a lot of the value that I
Yeah.
provide, or like my where my personally felt skill set like resides well,
Yeah.
right?
And I do tend to agree that it's like a brand has to have a human face
Yeah.
somewhere,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, that's great.
And it can be the beauty of it is like it can be different types of human faces, and that attracts a different audience or a different personality, I guess would be
Mhm.
like the easiest way to look at it.
Mhm.
Like you could be like, you know, super quiet genius, you know, mechanical engineer type that doesn't want to talk to anybody, and you can still be like the front man
Yeah.
of a
I
brand.
mean, you look at Elon Musk, like
Yeah.
he's not the charismatic type, but he's still
He's like a hybrid though,
yeah,
because he's also not shy
yeah,
and he likes to kind of get into it. Um, I've spent like a decent amount of time thinking about that for some reason because
yeah,
he's so polarizing,
yeah,
but that's not a bad thing.
yeah.
Um,
He is a brand, you know, and so
Absolutely.
and that's where
And so is
like
Steve Jobs.
exactly, and that's one thing I've noticed with you is like it gives you the power to start sub brands
Right.
because if you can associate your face with it, you can transition credibility.
Right.
Whereas like let's say you're just a faceless brand,
Yep.
you can't transition credibility because if you start a new brand,
Yeah.
it's just a ground zero from the ground up.
Starting up.
There's
Yeah.
no transition happening of credibility.
Yeah. It's almost like a LinkedIn of like company accomplishments. Like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, like this brand, yeah, or like a musician leaving a band and doing a side project or moving to another band.
Mhm.
I think there's a lot of value in that if you are willing to engage with community in a way that allows you to
Mhm.
be
Yeah.
vulnerable.
Yeah, I think we can dig into that too a little bit more. Your like community engagement profiles, obviously, it seems like some of the special sauce for what I was outlining in the beginning and how you've
Sure.
been prolific. And can you tell me about like strategies? How do you think about that? The community engagement itself.
I mean, this is where I kind of mean that it's so like intuitive. Like when you think about community, what does community mean? So the way that you look at community is probably the way your brand is going to handle community,
Hmm.
unless you have like an oversight committee that's like, no, your like warped idea of community is not community. We need
Yeah.
to fix this, and you need to keep your mouth shut,
Right.
right? Um, and the night, like again, not to go on like a negative rant, but like the knife industry, because of the kind of like the variance in like the base and like I don't know, like political, socioeconomic, religious, like what people can perceive as community is very different.
Hmm.
So for me, there was never any plan. Like I want to welcome people into the community.
It's like you just want to make friends.
I want to make friends. I
Yeah.
want them to make friends. I want to be a positive member in my own community, and I only want people who are positive in mine.
Yeah.
right? Inside of the larger knife community, my goal has always been to essentially be like an ambassador of our industry, right? So
Yeah.
if someone from outside of our industry meets me, I want them to leave with a positive view of the knife industry.
Yeah.
If I'm speaking to a customer, I want the same thing. If I'm speaking
Hmm.
to a company, I want them to feel like custom knife makers are good. If I'm speaking to a custom knife maker about companies, I want them to think that the companies are good. Like I look at it from like basically a 100% positivity bias.
I I can totally see that, and I
Yeah.
do think that's another huge thing that you've brought and that's helped you along the way. And I agree with that philosophy completely. I have one question though.
Okay.
Is there a time where the like default to positivity as far as your outward projection conflicts with being authentic? Is there like a time and a place to let out some of the more negative feelings in any way?
Yeah. And I guess that this is like, it's a tricky question to answer that I have a felt answer for,
Mhm.
which I guess a really easy way to look at this would be like around internet trolls. So, with any level of success will come some level of commentary,
Yeah.
especially online. Okay.
Mhm.
So you can't please everybody all the time. It shouldn't be a goal. Guess what? When you're a human and someone is like super rude and disrespectful to you, it usually has an effect. So the way that I guess I handle those situations, and this is learned behavior, right? In the beginning, a lot of times I would like nuke people
Mhm.
and I would get into an argument and I would make good points and I would be respectful, but it would be very pointed and very aggressive.
Mhm.
Like I think I have like overall I have a tendency towards aggression that like as I've gotten older has like mellowed,
Mhm.
but like because of my background, it was like words or physical. There was a method of wanting to handle situations.
Mhm.
As I did it more, I realized like, man, I just made my point and now I feel completely drained.
Mhm.
So I was like, they hit me twice. Like, one, they came after me and made me feel bad about myself. And then I defended myself and now I feel bad.
Yeah.
Right. And so basically the tact that I took was like, there's almost a zero tolerance policy on social media. Like, if you are disrespectful, you are gone. I just
Mhm.
nuke you from anything that I see your name
Mhm.
in. Okay. Anybody can ask me any question, even if it's like a little bit rude or like pointed, and I am happy to answer questions. At the point it becomes like disrespectful, totally gone.
Mhm. So it's diffuse as opposed to like
Yeah.
defend in a
Yeah.
sense.
I just
Mhm.
don't, one, at this point, I don't feel the need to defend
Well,
myself.
and let me add to that because we're talking about internet trolls, which is a
Totally.
huge specific part of
That's
this.
very specific.
But another thing is like, let's say something negative happens with your brand. Like, let's say you have a bunch of knives that are QC deficient for some
Sure.
reason, and a bunch of pre-orders aren't going to ship.
Yep.
There's the like you said, like the outward positivity by default, but
Yep.
then there's also the thing of like, I'm going to expose the fact that something really bad happened in my business, and
Yeah.
it's like that is the authentic thing to do would be to say that like this is what just happened,
Yep.
even if maybe they aren't pre-ordered, let's say, like, but
Yep.
just exposing, like, I guess being vulnerable from a brand
Yep.
perspective, or is it all positivity in that front?
No, no, no. And not, I don't even mean positivity in presentation.
Mhm.
Right. And I actually have a huge problem with that. Be like, because you look at social media and it's like all positive, man. You only see the best
Mhm.
things of everything.
Mhm.
Okay. If you want to be a steward and an ambassador of anything that you're doing, I think that showing mistakes and failures is huge,
Mhm.
not only for yourself, but like for people who are like, if anyone is ever going to learn something from me, like I also need them to see that I make mistakes and have to like
Yeah.
figure that out.
Yeah.
Cause there's a lot of like, you just don't see it.
Yeah.
So I think what I mean from the standpoint of positivity is it ties back into community, right? Which is, so say you have that problem and your QC or whatever it is, a bunch of parts fail from a machine shop or whatever it is. Well, if you built a relationship with that machine shop and they're in your community, like, and I know that problems are a given.
Mm-hmm.
It is not if, it is when. Okay. So you are balancing a relationship versus an accident, if it's an accident, right?
Mm-hmm.
How you respond to that problem and how the other company responds to that problem is actually kind of the input as to how you move forward, right? But there's no reason for like negativity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Understanding that problems arise is just the cost of doing business.
Yeah. Like an overall outward projection of like onward and upward.
Yeah, totally. It's just
Yeah. Yeah.
you're in motion.
Yeah.
I don't
Mm-hmm.
have time to like dwell on the problem.
Yeah.
And we're in a small industry. And for me, having relationships that are strong is more important than having perfect projects.
Mm-hmm.
Because if at that point it's purely transactional, I'm just not interested in
Yeah.
it. Like,
Yeah.
and people have like heard me say this before, but like in the collaborative process, my favorite point of any of the relationships has been our first fight,
Mm-hmm.
because at that point I've seen how the relationship is going to proceed.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I've been in meetings with CRKT where we've started to yell at each other.
Mm-hmm.
That's scary. That could have been it. That could have been it. If there wasn't like the trust and the value and the relationship, that's the end of the partnership.
Mm-hmm.
So you walk away from the table, get yourself together, and then you work it out. At that point you feel secure. So
Mm-hmm.
I look at it in the same way with customers, like I look at it in the same way with suppliers, and I look at it in the same way with other brands and other makers. All right.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I do not see competition. I never have. I don't see, uh, yeah, I guess. I mean, competition's so broad spectrum. I just look at it, I'm like, hey, we're in a small room. I want to know, I want my people to be successful and happy. And if that is the case, that room, that industry, like we all raise
Yeah.
each other up.
Yeah.
Like rising tide raises all vessels. I think it's just so appropriate for our
Yeah.
industry,
Oh, for sure.
right?
Yeah. No, I agree. I agree completely. So we touched on your community outreach, how that's a
Yep.
part, your positive general outward projection, um, the size of your brand, and like how that plays into it. There's other bullet points, but can you think of any other bullet points that are like critical or that people ought to know?
I mean, not really. I think one of the reasons we started Burnley brand itself was so that I had room to play, because especially if you start building a product that people really like, they assume that that's the product that you make. And when you look at knives, like you see this, like you see makers that are getting ready to retire that are making the same models they've been making. And not that that's a bad thing at all. Like they found the thing that they wanted to make. But I also realized my tendency to do that. And so Burnley brand gave me kind of this experimental kind of format
Mm-hmm.
where I could say, look, I do this, but I'm going to play with this.
I would say, like you mentioned, attachment point. It's
Yeah.
almost like the unpredictability of your brand is an
Yeah.
attachment point itself,
Yep.
because it's not. If you make an announcement like, "Hey, I got some cool stuff, got a drop," it's like I know you really well, and even me, I'm like, oh, I haven't. I it could
Right.
blow. I honestly don't know what that's going to be. I
Yeah.
really don't.
Yeah.
So that's the unpredictability and the like avoidance of getting into ruts,
Yeah.
and that's something that I've had to make sure I'm aware of is I like I said, I'm asking a lot of these questions to try to internalize, and one of the
Hmm.
things I've always thought about is like the process of the product, is what I
Right.
keep thinking about, but it's like making sure that that doesn't become a rut, you know what I mean? Of
Right.
like, this process is what I'm doing, like you
Yep.
mentioned, and if it's too predictable, am I missing out on an attachment point there, you know?
And that comes back to that like personal kind of question, like, what's the goal? And again, with scale, like you can create, like, there's no problem with having like product lines that don't change. Right. I've got a couple knives that I haven't changed since I designed them, which is always interesting to me because like I like to mess with things.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Um, but I think, okay, so if we talk about, you were asking like just like bullet point kind of things. I think one thing for brand building that is really effective is like creating gamification. Um, and gamification from the standpoint of just like, man, like make it fun.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Yeah.
people, and this will frustrate people sometimes, right? Because a lot of people, they just want to come into the brand and they want to buy the thing. Hey, I have money, give me what I want.
Mm-hmm.
With these small brands, like it doesn't work like that. And so doing things like drops, which are heavily streetwear based, right? Like no one from streetwear is ever going to question what a drop is,
Mm-hmm.
and they're not going to question why it sold out in 30 seconds. They're
Mm-hmm.
going to like understand culturally, oh yeah, there's like a bunch of people that want
Mm-hmm.
this. At least they did this for us to give us a
Yeah.
shot at it.
Well, and I think what you're also describing is like the entertainment value of the
Totally.
brand
Yep.
beyond just like the functional cutting a thing
Yeah.
performance value.
Yeah. Totally.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
and this is where like branding and marketing get nebulous. Okay. These things are authentic to my brand. We've done them. I started doing lotteries because I had 7 custom knives at a
Mm.
show and 100 people standing in front of my
Yeah.
table. So
It was a
lotteries are,
necessity.
it's
Yeah.
necessity. And it's like,
Mm.
I don't want to bum people out. I want people to be stoked when they go to a show and I want to give people a chance.
Yeah.
You can use all of these strategies in like a really manipulative way if that is your goal. And for me, like if you're going to build a brand around being like disingenuous and manipulative, like figuring out how to tie that into like, community and relationships is going to be
Yeah.
really hard,
Yeah.
you know.
Mm-hmm.
But like it's shades of gray, just like any aspect of life. Like certain things could be looked at from like like, people will think like, oh, you control your output to like control the market. Like, well, we actually don't have the ability to do that at this point.
Mm-hmm.
I just make what I make,
Mm-hmm.
order what I order, and then we like put them up. Sometimes it sells out crazy fast, sometimes it doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not like there's not some like intentional like manipulation,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and I think too that I think that like it keeps it honest, which is like very helpful. And it keeps, when I say honest, like I mean for yourself as like a creator, because it's really easy to get in. Like if you're gambling, it's really easy to get in like over your head.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if you're just like, okay, like I know that like for the most part, if we do a drop on our website, we can sell through about 200 pieces of something.
Mm-hmm.
If I went, all right, I'm going to like figure out how to manipulate the market and then I'm going to drop 500 pieces, that's like actually a huge risk,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. It's like you're over milking the cow kind of thing,
Over
or
milking the cow. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah.
Um, so yeah, man, I mean, a lot of this stuff, I feel like it builds, it builds on other elements, and that it's almost like a mission statement without having a mission statement. Like when I look at what my brand kind of incorporates, or like what the brand culture is, I'm super happy. There are a lot of areas where I would like to improve it. There's a lot of areas in the brand that I feel really deficient, or that I could be doing a much better job. But that's that question of scale. Like
Mm-hmm.
for me to do this, I either have to stop doing something else or I have to hire in to do this thing. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
not at a place where I want to do either of those things.
Yeah.
The reality when I look at it, like in the back of my head, like I've got probably 3 offshoot Burnley brand companies that I think would do really well. I've got entire product lines that I think would do really well and would be super fun. Same with apparel, same with accessories. So for me, when I look at it, sometimes I can get frustrated because that, like what I said, where the outward perception of our brand is bigger. I know that like the capability of our brand is bigger.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a constant balance point,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. Man, It's been great to ask you these questions. I'm internalizing a lot because, like I said, I've been kind of attached to so many brands through my career of like
Yeah, yeah.
designing for brands, and now I'm making a lot more of my own stuff, and so a lot of these questions have been rolling around more so in my head than ever before.
Well,
So,
it's like a fun like I have 2 questions around this. Like you had said, like I fall into like kind of a consulting relationship a lot of times,
hmm
like with other companies that I work
hmm
with. And I'm super fortunate that a lot of times like they let me in that close. And I really enjoy it. But like I've always wondered, like, do like if you're working with a larger company, what of the tactics that like I actually have could fit into a company culture and then be applied? And do they work the same way? Are they scalable? Or
hmm
does it need to start grassroots and then grow into an overarching brand that's the culture around it? But like for you, you could pick some very specific like elements and be like, all right, I'm just going to like figure out a little bit of gamification.
hmm
Does it feel right? Does my current customer enjoy it? You know, and when I say gamification, I mean like everything from lotteries to
hmm
drops to, you know, giveaways,
more one
raffles.
off.
Yeah,
Yeah,
one-off stuff.
yeah,
You know, like what Worksharp did
a little more
was
experimentation. Yeah.
yeah, like, you know, Worksharp is like dropping like geotag boxes of gear. Like that's full
hmm
gamification. You're getting people who are like, okay, this is awesome. There's a box in the woods
Yeah.
and I'm going to go find it.
hmm Yeah.
That's like prime gamification, right? So
That's good info.
figuring out it's like it almost sounds just dumb, but like figuring out where your brand can have fun,
hmm Yeah.
like, and
Yeah.
where your customers can have fun. Because
hmm
if you look at it that way, like it's like kind of nice for everybody,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
If nobody's having fun, or especially if you're the maker or the manager of the brand and you're not having fun, it's probably pretty obvious
Yep.
outwardly, and the brand doesn't seem fun.
Yeah.
And it's like, so part of it is, how do you have fun as a maker, and how do you make, like, put yourselves in the shoes of someone maybe looking to buy your product, and like how do you put a smile on their face in a
Yeah.
sense,
Well, and this is long
make them
game,
laugh.
right? This
hmm
is long game. So I feel like there are more younger makers entering the market than, and like you and I are separated by 10 years and we're still younger makers.
hmm
I'm like maybe starting to transition out of that. You are still fully in it. I mean, our industry is older,
hmm
right? But I think that like if I could give advice around like brand, one of the things would be like as you're building a brand, like leave yourself flexibility because 20 years in, 15 years in, things will change. I don't know what they are, you don't know
hmm
what they are, but if you create a robust system that allows you some like flexibility for like lateral moves, I think it's a really good insurance policy. You could
hmm
make the thing on your last day of making that you started making on your first day. That could be your personality and you'd be
hmm
fine. But if
hmm
you're not, you create this little buffer that says, today I want to do this.
hmm
And your brand can support you.
Yeah.
I think we've talked about this a little bit. Like at this point, one of my desires for my brand and one of its main functions is to almost act as a patron for me. Right.
mm
So my brand allows me to be more creative.
hmm
It allows me
Yeah.
flexibility to take on projects that are not profitable, to do work that is like education based and
Yeah.
like for myself, self
Yeah.
work kind of
Yeah.
thing. That's that's like pretty cool.
And it's that question of like, do you work for your company or does your company work for you?
Yeah.
It's kind
Yeah.
of the old litmus test.
Yep. Same with money, right? Like
Yeah.
what's the money doing?
hmm
You know,
Yeah.
maybe that's like the same thing. Like I always say, like money's purpose is movement. So like for me, a brand would be kind of the same thing.
hmm
I've never looked at business from a purely financial standpoint because I realize that I won't make my decisions purely based on financial
Right.
questions
Yeah.
or answers.
And it allows that fun into the equation, like you said.
Totally.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep.
Burnley brand is fun, man. It really is.
Thanks, dude. Trying to make it more fun.
Yeah.
It's like, that's where I feel like if I had more, like, I wish I had more capacity, because I would love to be at a point where I'm like, hey, I have all these ideas, and then I have some people who can help me execute. And that's like a hard thing
Yeah.
to do,
Yeah.
you know?
Um, I can see what you're saying. Yeah.
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 Someday.
Yeah.
I basically want to, like, do you know who Tom Sachs is?
Rings a bell,
Okay.
but maybe not.
He's an artist. I will send you a video. Anybody listening, if you look up Tom Sachs 10 Bullets, it is, if I ever filmed a video for like an employee orientation film, this is it. It's so
right.
spot
10
on.
bullets.
10 Bullets by Tom Sachs. But he's just super creative, and like, he's got a team that works with him. He has ideas, he gets to make the things he wants, and then he has a team that's able to like help him with some of the like process kind of tasks. And I think that's like pretty common. I mean, like, painters have people paint, like laying out canvases for them and stuff like that. And it's like, it's a very it's like a weird thing to look at, but I think that when I see a company, I'm like, yeah, I would love to just be in it, like in an R&D lab. It was like when we went to, I guess I won't mention the name of company, went and toured company, and the owner has his own like R&D lab, right?
That's awesome.
That's awesome.
That's fantastic.
That's the goal.
Yeah, that is my goal. That's a great goal.
Yeah.
Having the old R&D lab.
Like, take the elevator down to the super secret basement lab, like with all the good tools.
That's
like,
awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's all great stuff, man. I really appreciate you answering my questions. And
for sure,
I guess I didn't really take many notes coming into this, but I just had some raw interest in what you were thinking. So
it's good questions, man. That's fun, because you and I haven't interviewed anybody, which I think we want to do.
We've been talking about getting a guest on here someday. So if you guys think that'd be cool, or if you have a guest that you'd want to hear from, maybe drop a line. And well,
cool. And like, if we brought a guest on, would we even do it like interview style, or would we just integrate them into our conversation?
A triangle. Yeah. No, that'd probably be the way to do it. Yeah. It might depend on who it is too. Just
a triangle of radness.
Yeah.
That movie keeps coming up in my head. I guess there could be like a component where you have just open conversation, but it would be cool to have like specific questions and like interview. Okay. So then that means that I get to interview you on your CAD process in an upcoming episode.
That would be great.
Okay.
Yeah.
You know what's funny is I actually think there's a lot of parallels.
Yeah. Funny enough, I agree.
I think just from a psychological standpoint, I think you're doing a lot of the same things, which is super helpful, actually. To think about.
That's going to be fun to dive into that. I look forward to that. Don't hold back any punches, man. Just
okay. I'm super nervous because I've never interviewed anybody, so it's like I'm definitely gonna write down some questions, but I'm also like, I'm so scatterminded a lot of times that like, and it's easy to go off the rails, but you're so focused.
Yeah.
Especially with CAD.
It's a facade.
You might have to handhold me, be like, ask this question.
That's great.
Yeah, I'm psyched. Anything else going on? Oh, I know one thing. We could touch on the Nova 1.
Yeah. So are we looking to? Do you want to do that right now, or you want to do an episode on that?
I think we should definitely do an episode. Okay. Maybe let's do that. Maybe let's try to do that next week.
Yeah. So the Nova 1 guys,
and then roll into CAD.
Burnley's design for my brand, which is Schwartz Knives. The ball is continuing to roll on that, and we think we're due for an episode that sort of goes on a deep dive of where we're at and what we're trying to do. Future
steps.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I look forward to that.
Awesome.
And we haven't even hardly talked about it since the last time we talked about it. I mean, a little bit, but like I said, we do want to try to capture the actual conversations about what we're going to do with this.
Right.
And so like, I've been kind of intentionally not asking you too much about it until we get live, because I want people to hear like, this is actually how this is going to occur.
Yeah.
Real time.
Yeah. So. I think that's a really good goal. And it basically mimics like the normal production cycle, because like we'll submit a design, and then you don't hear back from a while.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
It's
then
broken
it
up.
like ramps up towards the end as it's like going into prototyping and you're having to
Hmm.
make like materials decisions.
Yeah.
So it should be pretty fun, but
It will be.
cool. Guys, thank you for listening. Please leave us a review if you feel so inclined. That would be awesome.
Yeah. I would love it. And
And cool.
keep tagging along. We got more to come, and
More.
we sure appreciate it.
Yep. All right. See you around, guys.
Yeah. Peace.